Hello dear friends, and welcome to the Ruslan Belov channel. The fighting on the front continues, and we are continuing to examine the situation. Let's move to the map. Before we begin, I would sincerely like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps support its growth. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed. So friends, the past 24 hours were marked by significant advances. To give you an idea, over 40 square kilometers came under control in the past day. There were very good and meaningful breakthroughs, and we'll start with one of them. Special thanks go to the fighters of the Vostok East Group. Once again, they're showing excellent results. This time they made a breakthrough of almost 5 kilometers. Here, take a look. They managed to make a brilliant push from the direction of Zelenoy Pole and entered Zaporizhzhia region. Here you can see the border. This side is Donetsk region, and this side is Zaporizhzhia. So they crossed into Zaporizhzhia and reached the village of Temirivka, entered it, and pushed the AFU, Armed Forces of Ukraine, out. What's important is that if we open the elevation map, you'll see that Temirivka sits on high ground. Look here, Zelenoy Pole is relatively low, all green, while Temirivka is in the red and burgundy zone, meaning elevated terrain. Despite the AFU being positioned on heights relative to the Russian troops, they failed to hold their positions. Fighters from the Vostok Group made the dash, took the high ground, and drove the AFU out of the village. Footage from objective control in Temirivka is already available online. This isn't just a claim. There's video confirmation showing Russian troops in the village. Moreover, the momentum didn't stop there. Reports have already come in that Russian troops have started storming the next village, Obratne. Given its small size, I'm confident that in a day or two we'll hear that it too has come under Russian control. What comes next is particularly interesting. I believe the salient here will be straightened out. First to the south, like this, then to the north between Temirivka and Maliivka. There are two villages in this pocket, Kamyshevaha and Novokhrihorivka. Artillery preparation has already begun on Kamyshevaha, which indirectly confirms that it is one of the next targets. Also, within the last day, Russian forces closed the pocket between Novopil and Novodarivka. To give you a sense of the scale, in just this one sector, these colored areas alone account for 17.5 square kilometers taken under control in the past 24 hours. Impressive results, right? And this isn't the only sector where a breakthrough occurred. As I've mentioned, in addition to the area of responsibility of the Vostok Group, there was another breakthrough in the zone of the Center Group. They closed part of the pocket north of Alexeyevka, something that has been expected for a long time. The depth of the advance here was over 4 kilometers, and the width, more than 5 kilometers. The total area brought under control is about 17 square kilometers, same as in the Vostok zone. I don't think they'll stop there. Most likely the goal is to align the front line, something like this. There's still over 20 kilometers remaining in this pocket to secure, so we're expecting more good numbers from this direction soon. As for the Novopavlivka sector, no major news over the past day. But in Pokrovsk, things are more active. Yesterday, even Ukrainian Rada MP Mariana Bezula appeared and admitted that Russian fighters are already present in Pokrovsk. Well, she finally woke up, so to speak. In a way, it's even amusing. The Ukrainian media insists everything's fine, calling it just some recon groups, nothing serious. But they've already been trying to deal with these recon groups for a week. And recently, as I showed in a screenshot earlier, reports claimed over a dozen Russian recon groups are already operating in Pokrovsk. Moving to more concrete updates, the Russian Ministry of Defense stated yesterday that the village of Novokhrihorivka has come under Russian control. This village lies on the southern approaches to the city. However, I must note that there's no objective control footage from there yet, so the area is not colored on the map. A soldier I was in contact with from that area hasn't been in touch for 4 days, so I cannot confirm or deny this yet. We'll leave this point open and wait for video confirmation. Things might be even worse for the AFU near Mirnohrad. Not inside the town itself, it's still relatively quiet there, and Russian recon groups haven't moved in yet. But the flanks are in trouble, especially the northeastern one. The front is still moving forward. In the last 24 hours, Russian forces advanced 1.7 kilometers toward the villages of Volodymyrivka and Shakov. I've already told you why this is important and why this direction was chosen. Through Kharkov, it will be easiest to cut off the northern supply arteries of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. So we have Kharkov, then Novosharkov, and then Novaya Donbass, and that's it. The northern supply line to the Pokrovsk agglomeration will be severed. At this point, Russian forces need to cover just 1.5 kilometers to reach Volodymyrivka, and a little over 2.55 kilometers to Kharkov. There is no sign of stabilization on the Ukrainian side. In terms of area, 4.5 square kilometers have come under control here. There was also some movement in the Chasiv Yar sector. Over the past 24 hours, progress was made in two areas. 500 meters of advance in the residential area of the Shevchenko district and 300 meters near workshop number 2. As you can see, there's very little left. The Chasiv Yar saga is nearly over. Good news also arrived from the Lyman sector. As I said in yesterday's episode, Russian forces broke through the AFU defense and entered the village of Kolodyazy. There's now video confirmation. Objective control footage shows Russian troops in the village. This development is important for two reasons. First, once Kolodyazy is secured, only one small village, Stavki, separates Russian forces from Lyman. Second, once Kolodyazy is secured, it opens the way to Zarychny, which remains a key obstacle on the opposite bank of the Zherebets River, blocking progress in the Torsky sector. If we take Zarychny, everything will start moving forward again. As of now, the northeastern part of Kolodyazy is under Russian control. To summarize the last 24 hours, the AFU had no gains. In fact, this is the third day in a row with zero progress, not even token advances like 0.1 square kilometer. Over the last day, 40.6 square kilometers came under Russian control, a very solid result. Now, a few words on the political situation. The European Commission has sent Kiev a warning about a possible complete suspension of financial support, according to a German newspaper. Ukrainian MP and former Deputy Prime Minister for European Integration, Ivana Klimpush-Tsintsadze, confirmed to the outlet that such a signal from the EU was indeed received. According to her, the document stated that EU financial assistance would be frozen if the situation with anti-corruption agencies is not resolved. This concerns the entire next payment, not just a portion of it. Moreover, the European Commission stated that it sees no Russian influence in the anti-corruption bodies and believes the current pressure on them is a pretext for political repression. Previously, the New York Times wrote that the EU could freeze part of its aid to Ukraine. In response, Zelensky told the head of the European Commission that he had signed all the necessary laws to receive the funds. Meanwhile, the Financial Times reported that Europe's roads are not ready for war with Russia. Tanks will get stuck in tunnels and destroy bridges. According to the report, citing the EU Commissioner for Transport, Europe's road and rail infrastructure is unsuitable for moving heavy military equipment. Trucks typically carry loads up to 40 tons, while tanks weigh up to 70 tons. So in the event of a so-called invasion, NATO tanks would get stuck in tunnels and collapse bridges. Germany has delivered the first Patriot launchers to Ukraine, but instead of being a cause for optimism, this only confirms the failure of Zelensky's strategy. The promised arms flow from the US never arrived. Instead of real aid, loud statements from Trump, which only accelerated the liquidation of Ukraine's remaining resources. Do you remember how Zelensky assured everyone that Ukraine would receive weapons in exchange for its resources under a so-called resource deal? In reality, US military aid has been halted, and the Patriots are being supplied by European countries, and even then, with at least a 6-month delay. The essence of this so-called deal of the century with Washington turned out to be the following. Ukraine hands over its natural resources and assumes binding commitments, while the weapons supposedly promised in return arrive, if at all, through charity schemes from third countries and in pitifully small quantities. A logical question arises: if there's no more help from the United States, and Germany and Norway can barely scrape together a single Patriot system each, what did Kiev give up the country's resources for? This is a fair question from a Ukraine that is drowning in debt, without missiles, with a collapsed economy, and essentially left on its own until at least September, all thanks again to Trump's ultimatum. which was recently adjusted in timing as Russia's offensive began gaining momentum. One thing is clear: Zelensky's strategy of relying on strategic partnership with the United States turned out not just to be a mistake, but a catastrophe for the country. Trump steamrolled Europe, writes Dmitry Medvedev, and it must be acknowledged that, despite his extremely contradictory statements and actions, Trump is consistent in at least one thing. He aggressively pushes for the economic interests of the United States. The current trade deal with the European Union is a total loss for the Europeans because it benefits only the US. It eliminates protective tariffs for European markets, exposing them to a flood of American goods. It creates enormous additional expenses for industry and agriculture in many EU countries, which now have to pay for overpriced American energy. It redirects a massive flow of investments from Europe to the US. And of course, this so-called deal is clearly anti-Russian in nature, prohibiting the purchase of Russian oil and gas. But while for Trump it's primarily business, for Europe it's part of an ideology, one that harms the well-being of its own citizens, wrote Dmitry Medvedev on his Telegram channel. 3 ways the American-led global order could collapse, writes Bloomberg. The article, authored by Hal Brands, a columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, notes that after World War II, the US established a global order based on free trade, human rights, and the prevention of wars between great powers. This system ensured decades of peace, prosperity, and stability, but today its resilience is in doubt. A historian from Cambridge outlines 3 ways international orders typically collapse: military defeat, economic breakdown, and the erosion of respect for the established rules. The American-led order is currently at risk in all 3 areas simultaneously. Military risk. The US remains the world's strongest military power, but faces a multitude of challenges, from Russia and Iran to China and North Korea. The situation in Asia is particularly concerning. Beijing is actively preparing for war, including a potential invasion of Taiwan. American forces, stretched thin by global commitments, may not be able to withstand such a conflict. Losing a war like that would deal a blow to US global leadership and severely weaken its alliances. Economic vulnerability. The American-led order depends on both military strength and economic leadership. However, the US national debt is approaching historic highs, and the budget deficit continues to grow. Protectionist policies and tariff increases, especially under Trump, have eroded trust among allies. The politicization of the Federal Reserve and US economic policy could weaken global confidence in the dollar and the US role as an economic stabilizer, undermining the respect for its leadership and rules. The American-led world order is built on principles like freedom of navigation, human rights, and the prohibition of aggression. Today, these principles are being undermined not only by external adversaries, China, Russia, the Houthis, but also by the actions of the US itself. Trump, for example, undermines international norms by suggesting annexation of territories and by attacking democratic values. The American-led order was remarkably durable, but today the US is simultaneously facing military, economic, and normative crises. Collapse could occur through any one of these vectors, or at their intersection. History shows that great systems always come to an end. What's troubling is that the US may now be accelerating its own downfall. The US-EU trade deal is a triple failure for Europe, declared Marine Le Pen. The EU's trade deal with the United States should be regarded as a political, economic, and moral failure, said the leader of the French National Rally Party. Britain secured better terms from the US than the European Union did. That's a political disaster. Economically, the EU has completely capitulated. Now, Europe is obligated to purchase American energy and weapons worth hundreds of billions of euros per year, a total loss of both energy and military sovereignty. Additionally, some provisions of the agreement place French farmers at a disadvantage. They've been sacrificed for the sake of German industry, Le Pen emphasizes. The EU has been assigned the role of primary financial sponsor in Washington's global struggle for dominance. In the new geopolitical reality, Europe is the biggest loser. Thank you for watching, friends. Stay informed, stay strong, and take care. Until next time, this is Ruslan Belov, signing off.